start asking you those, and then
yeah,
throw it to the crowd.
sure.
Hey everybody, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Spotlight panel on Scott Snyder, and I'm James Tynion IV. I've known this guy for a little while, so I was racking my brain of what sort of questions I might ask him that I might not know the answers to, and then once we get through a few of my questions, I want to throw it open to the crowd to really, make this a dialogue, and you can get all sorts of crazy stories out of this guy. So let's do it.
Yeah, the way I like to run this is basically have a friend ask a few questions and get started, but then it's really a place for you guys to ask anything you want about the books, about the industry or the craft, or anything you want. I love coming to cons for the reason that writing is a really lonely job, and he'll tell you, I bug everybody to talk on the phone all the time, because it's just you in a room, by yourself. And so coming to cons, I feel like it's my chance to get to talk to you guys a bit online, all of that, and this particular kind of environment is the best for it, where you can ask. I want to give you guys a chance to ask anything you want and really have a dialogue and say thank you, honestly, for giving me a dream job, I wake up and get to go to work on Batman and everything every day. It's crazy. So this is sort of my opportunity to actually have a dialogue with you guys about stuff. So anything you want to ask, don't be shy. Okay? All right, good. All right, hit me.
Yeah.
I don't know what these questions are. I tried to pry them out of it like 2 this morning.
Well, I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the piece of work that made you realize you wanted to spend your life writing in the first place? Like that seminal starting point, or just can you pinpoint a moment that you really knew you wanted to write?
Yeah, I can actually. I was about 8, and my parents sent me away to. That sounds so evil, but they sent me away to sleepaway camp. It was this 8-week athletic camp, and it was all boys. I don't know if anyone has been to sorry, turn that off. Anyone has been to athletic, don't go. But anyway, I was like a little geeky Dungeons and Dragons boy. I was like a little chubby kid, and it was like this very intense athletic camp in upstate New York, and I would just hide at arts and crafts the whole time. I hated it. Anyway, the thing I liked, it was the kind of camp where they had color war, and at the end of the year, you were chosen that color for life, and people still showed up at the camp and were like, great team, and you're 60 years old, and you're like, what is the matter with you? But anyway, and the weirdest was on the night that you get chosen for one team or another, all the seniors come running into your room, all the freshmen are like, fresh meat, and they pull you up to this cafeteria, and you're on this stage in front of, I'm sure it was 3 feet high, but in my mind it was 100 feet tall, in front of the whole camp. And the two teams actually pretend to play tug of war with you to see which team is going to get you. And I was wearing all gray, and actually, I was team gray. I was wearing all. I was wearing all green. I was wearing my Hulk pajamas and stuff like that, literally Hulk stuff. And I got picked for the gray team, and they were like, "Take that stuff off!" And they pulled my stuff off, and I was in my underoos. I remember being pulled down the side and just being so humiliated. And that's when no, it's not when I wanted to be a writer. Although I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. I want to look back and be like, they were actually Batman underoos. That's why. But anyway, sorry, I'm in a corn maze right now. But the one thing I really look forward to, we had this one counselor, I remember his name was Ted, and every night he would read to us from Eyes of the Dragon, the Stephen King book, and I was young, it was way over our heads, I think, which was probably a bad influence. But anyway, he started it on the first night and he finished it on the last night of 8 weeks. And I just looked forward to that so much. Every day I couldn't wait to go in the book and hear another chapter about Flag and Roland and all that stuff. And I still remember that joy. And that was when I really began to think about wanting to write. It's when I started to take Dungeons and Dragons seriously, as weird as that sounds, and want to be dungeon master and tell stories. And my handwriting still bears the residual traces of my dungeon master handwriting, I swear to God, where my A is all Baroque, and weirdly dungeon-y. It's very weird. But anyway, that's kind of where it began for me. And then when I got back, I really fell in love with reading a lot more than I had before that, and starting to tell my own stories. And it was really around then, and then in 4th grade I had a great writing class, and I just knew I wanted to do it. But I wanted to be a comic book writer-artist, not a writer for a long time.
Well, once you started studying writing in college and grad school at Brown and Columbia, what do you think that, like, is there a particular piece of advice or guidance that you think like shaped your work the most? I know, like, I was a student of Scott, so I can point to many things that this guy you know, popped into my head that really shaped me into the writer I am today.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I had a teacher in. I had a couple moments, but I think the one that I'd point to is I was in 12th grade, and I had fallen in love with the idea of being a comic book writer and artist. And I took this writing class, and I wrote this story for it, and I kept writing it. We had this, at the end of the year, everybody like read their stories, and one of the kids would have everybody over to their house with their parents. And I wrote this story that I just loved. It was like about Jack the Ripper, but it was like that he actually had a brother in America, and he lived in this crane. It was like completely, I'm sure it was terrible, but it was, I was just so in this. And on the day that we read, she basically told, we'd all go in a line, and I was the last person, alphabetically, and we kind of ran out of time before I was about to go. And I was so upset because I wanted to read in front of my parents, and she's like, oh, you have like a minute, you know? So I read, and I was reading, and it got cut off very quickly. And I remember I called her up, and you know, obviously, like, it was a big taboo. I called the school and said, I don't remember what my lie was, but I had some lie where I was like, I need her number because this, and this. And I called her up, and I was like, at home, and I was like, I'm so hurt by this, you know, like, I've cared so much about this class and I mean, this is the wrong thing to do. It's just like the total a-hole move, because I was just a kid, but I was like, I cared about this thing so much, you know, and you just gave me a minute. And she was like, you call me up at my house, you bother me on a Sunday, and you know, you're telling me this, and like, I have a life, and da-da-da. And she was like, you know something? You're a real writer. And I was like, because I'm being a jerk. She was like, and I sat down with her after that, and she was like, you know what, I'm going to give you advice, because she's like, I see you have like the affliction of writing, is what she called it. And she was like, always write the story that you would like to pick up and read more than any other, and never care what anyone thinks. Like, whatever you're in the mood for, you pick that story up, you write that story. It doesn't matter if it's the funniest, or the smartest, or if it's political, or if it's memoir. And that is literally, he'll tell you, the advice that I start every class with when I teach, whether I teach at college, or grad school, or through DC. Write the comic or the story that you would be inspired to pick up and read that day, and that's it. That is like the compass for me.
What was your first published work? Yeah.
My first, I went to grad school for writing, and I did that whole, because one of the things is, like, I had a really easy ride in comics. I feel like, I don't know who I, like, killed in a former life and, like, gave to the devil to have, like, the best ride. But I had a pretty easy time in comics, in that I was hired at a time when DC was really looking for new writers, and they gave me a chance on Detective and American Vampire and all that. So I didn't have like that grind that a lot of people at cons like this that are really trying to break in have, and I'm very grateful and lucky with that. But I did go through that grind in prose, is one of the things I'd say. So I basically fell more into writing prose when I was in college, because they didn't have comic book classes, right? And I went to school at Brown so that I wanted to take classes at RISD and be an illustrator like Frank Miller and Mike Mignola. I wanted to do both. But I couldn't take the art classes because the schedules didn't match up, and I fell more into writing. And so I went to Disney World and worked there for a year after, and had this whole kind of year where I was like, my parents were like, if you want to be a writer, you got to work at a publishing house. And I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm going to be a janitor in Disney World and work in Las Vegas, and I need experience. And I did all that stuff, and then I came back to grad school. And when I was there, I started working on stories, and I tried sending them out, and I just got rejected everywhere. I was rejected for like years, you know, for 2 years. So just hundreds and hundreds of stories you sent out, just self-addressed stamped envelope, check the mail, is it a thin envelope coming back? Oh, you know, or is it like always just over and over? And honestly, the funniest thing is I swear I told him, like, I think it was a year or two ago, I got a rejection for a story I had sent out 10 years ago. And I was like, you hated it that much that you had to, like, you know, you waited to just like, and it still hurt my ego, you know, now. I don't even know, like, you know, still. And then another time, I remember I told him I got 3 rejections from the same magazine for the same story. And it's like they rejected it once, and I was like, ugh. And then they sent another rejection for it, and I was like, I get it, you don't like it. And then they sent a third one that they had put in their own envelope and put a stamp on themselves, like they had taken the time to pay it for an envelope to like reject the same story the third time with a new letter. And I was like, oh my God, I am that bad. I'm really terrible at this writing gig. And anyway, I got more into it at that point. It sent stuff out a lot, and I taught high school and tutored rich kids and all that kind of stuff for a while, and finally got a story into a magazine called Zoetrope. It was run by Francis Ford Coppola and those guys out in San Francisco, and they found me off the slush, literally found me off the slush. And one thing I'd say is if you're interested in short story writing, like in prose, once you begin to get published, and this is true of comics too, they'll tell you, once you get one gig, they start to multiply if you kind of do an okay job with that. And so that really opened the door very quickly. And then I could say to other magazines, well, I have a story coming out in this one, and they'll be like, if one of them, somebody likes this kid, maybe we'll like him. And they start looking at you more seriously. And so once you get your foot in the door, it starts to kind of be easier after that.
Well, what was that first story about?
Oh, it was called Blue Yodel. It was basically about a guy, it was super weird. It was about a guy who is chasing a blimp. It takes place in the 1920s, and it's about a guy who's driving a Model T across the country at that time, chasing this blimp, because he believes that the girl he loves is inside this blimp. And it's his journey across the whole country in this broken down Model T, and following this blimp. And you don't know if it's real or not, and all this kind of stuff. And then, I look back and I'm like, what were you thinking? But that was it.
Well, once you were sort of established in that world, you broke over into the comics industry. Even though, like, I'm sure at that moment it seemed like you were going towards the prose world pretty firmly. And then, but when comics reemerged as like a core part of your life, did you feel like it really offered you? How did it like open you up, and why are comics such a good home for you?
They're great. I don't miss prose at all. It's funny. I thought I would. I mean, I studied, I went to school for prose and all that stuff. And the reason I fell out of comics, like I said, was I just didn't have the opportunity to do art, really. And I had a portfolio, which I still threaten Greg Capullo with sometimes. I'm like, look how good this was. And it's not good at all. But I'm like, I'm going to do a variant one day. And I'm always like, if I could just do one variant for Batman one time, that would be great. But anyway, one day I will have my way. But what happened was, I've told this story, so forgive me if you've heard me talk before, but I came out of grad school, and it was a different time, and everybody was getting these very big book deals at that moment. The economy was very different, and there was a lot of big successes in books right then, like Jonathan Safran Foer and Nicole Krauss, and a lot of like big debut. Everyone was looking for like big debut writers so that they could do these books that would become movies, and there was just a lot of hype and money. And I got one of these book deals. I was really lucky and got this, very lucrative book deal. And I was totally an idiot, though. I didn't realize that when you get a book deal, like I had a short story collection and a novel, and most of the money was weighted towards the novel. But what I also didn't understand is that money doesn't come unless they approve the book you're working on, and they can retract it, and then they can say, actually, you owe us money for the advance because we reject the book, so now you have to pay us back. And I was just like an idiot. And I sold the story collection, it went well, and I sold this novel idea. It was about a barnstormer at the same time, and I started working on this book, and I really loved it, and we had a great time in the story collection. I had this big paycheck coming if they liked the book, and we bought a house, and we had a kid, and my wife was in school, and all of a sudden the economy just started collapsing in 2008. And all of a sudden you noticed in books that suddenly they weren't just taking the book that they had said, sure, write your book and we'll take it, and then we see this as an investment in you, and we'll give you the money even if the book isn't quite what we want. It's not a bestseller, we're investing in you for life, like for a long term. It was like, this book better be good. And it was like, oh no, this is not good. And it became, I loved the book and they were very nice to me, but it became a moment when I just realized I was so depressed. I mean, I've always had trouble with depression and anxiety and stuff, and this was a moment when I just knew they were never going to take this book, and I was going to work on it desperately, trying to make it more commercial every day, and I'll never forget that feeling. And I was tutoring, all this stuff to make money, and I would go to work hating this book, and I loved the idea, because all I was trying to do was make it more and more like love story and action and this, because I was desperate to make money, and doing the thing that you love, like that you've always wanted to do, and hating it is just the worst feeling in the world. girl. And I was admittedly, like, I was drinking too much, I was depressed, I hated it. And then in that weird moment, as James will tell you, he was my student right around this time. And I remember coming to him because he knew all this continuity stuff. And I was like, basically I got invited by my buddy, Owen King, who I'd been in writing school with, to be in an anthology. It was like prose writers make up new superheroes, and most of the superhero stories were really funny. They were just kind of silly. They were like a support group for superheroes with terrible powers, right? It was one of them, and it was like one guy, like, he never had to go to the bathroom, and he was just like, where does it all go, you know? And another one was about a superhero called the Meerkat, and mine was really serious. I tried, serious, but I tried to do one that was like more heavy and dark about a kid who was in the Bikini Atoll tests and comes back and feels very different, and something's wrong with him, and anyway, these two comic book editors came to the launch for that book, and it was Mark Doyle and Janine Schaefer, one from DC and one from Marvel, and they asked if anyone was serious about comics, and I was like, I don't have comics in my bag, I'm a big comic fan, and they were like, well, would you like to pitch? And I was like, yeah. And so I started pitching, and my wife, I remember, was like, why are you pitching for these things? And comic books pays nothing. I mean, it does not pay much, like, when you're starting out at all, as many of you I'm sure know, it's not. She's like, if you just finish your book, you'll have this big book deal and stuff, and I was like, you know why? Because it's like the only fun I've had in writing in 2 years, like, is writing this and writing that story I wrote for that book, because I hate working on this book. And she was just like, well, all right then, why don't we do this? Why don't we take out another loan? And why don't you try doing that instead? And I was like, really? She's like, yeah, let's do it. And she's great. I mean, I love her for that too. And I did. I was like, I dissolved the book deal. I paid them back some money, and they were very sweet to me. They were never mean, but it was sort of like, they were like, admittedly, I think relieved that they would never have to deal with this book again, and I wouldn't either. And I started pitching really hard, and I got in through that. And what I realized was the thing that really makes me love comics more than prose, and it's not like I'll never write prose. I have a kid's book actually I'm working on the side that he knows about, I'm really proud of, that it's more of like an 8 to 12-year-old kind of group, just for myself, is that I've never, like I said, I've always been somebody that, I love being social and going to cons and that stuff, but I've had really a lot of moments in my life where I've had trouble with depression and those things, and I feel okay talking about that stuff. And writing prose did not sit well really with me when I didn't live in the city anymore. We moved to a more rural area in Long Island, and being alone all day and working on a book with nobody to talk to and no contact with anybody was not good for my mental health, I realized. And while I was in grad school and while I was writing prose, when I lived with a bunch of other writers and we were kids, it was awesome because you write a story and then you tear it apart with each other and you're part of a community, whatever. But when you're doing it professionally by yourself, it is lonely. It is a lonely job. And it's great, but so comics, the great thing is, like, I call Capullo, I was just talking to him this morning, and I'm like, dude, that helmet is amazing, I love that. He's like, yeah, man, see you in 2 weeks, and then I'm like, hey, yesterday I was talking to Jock, and it's like, Jock, on the set, we're working on the second arc of Witches, I was talking about the designs and all that stuff, and it's so collaborative. It's such a joy to get to work with people you love as friends, and also as colleagues that you admire, and go to work that way and deal with them and have a team like working on Batman and working on all these books where you're in it together. And that collaborative aspect to me really is the magic of comics, where you're making this living thing together all the time, and a lot of it comes from that collaboration. Like the excitement and energy in a comic and an issue comes from the back and forth. You can feel it when it's not there, when it's disconnected. You can feel, I think, like, I had one artist I worked with once, very briefly, really early in my career, where he never wanted to, and nothing against this at all, but he never wanted to communicate. It was always like, send me the script and I'll draw it, and that's it. And I hated that. It was miserable, it was, what's the point, And for me, it's like, we get on the phone all the time, and I always warn whoever I'm working with. Like, I was talking to Sean, because I'm going to do some Batman stuff with Sean Murphy soon. I was talking to him, and early, when I first started with him on American Vampire, and I was like, I have to warn you, like, I'm going to bug you a lot, and call you up, be like, I want your input, I want you to change the story, I want you to make it yours, and all that. And those are the guys I work with, they all love that. To work that way, I mean, we work that way together, so those artists that I like to work with, like Jock and Francesco and Greg, we have that relationship where we like the back and forth, I like them to change what I put on the page, and I like reacting to it and changing my dialogue, and that constant back and forth is really fun.
So, taking it to Batman for a second, or not for a second, we'll talk about Batman all day, but I think that it's pretty clear right now that what you've been doing on the Bat books for the last 4 years has just been absolutely, it has taken taken the entire industry by storm. And I think it's clear you have a very strong connection to Bruce Wayne. And I just wanted to sort of ask you, like, how much of yourself do you see in Bruce when you're writing him, but also when other people are writing him? Like, Bruce Wayne is the larger concept rather than just your Bruce.
That's a great question, actually. I had not thought of it that way. Well, I think Bruce has always been my favorite character, but it's been for different reasons. Like, when I was a kid, I lived in New York in the 80s, and when Frank Miller did Year One and Dark Knight Returns, it was like Batman became very, very real to me, where in Year One, he was dealing with the city as it looked to me. Times Square looked that way, and it was run down, and I couldn't go to Central Park, or I couldn't get on the subway, I was not allowed to do all these things and stuff, and there was the sense of jeopardy for the city all the time, and there was Batman, and similarly, Dark Knight Returns was the same thing, but translated into comic book language, where it wasn't openly about, the Cold War or this or that, but all those things are in there in these big ways, and they're just translated into comic book language, which honestly is what we're trying to do with Super Heavy. The story we're doing now in Batman is the issue we just did, issue 44, which deals with sort of more entrenched kind of systemic problems, is sort of what the whole arc is about, but most of it is translated into like the deepest comic book language possible, where it's like monsters and energy monsters and robots and whatever. But that's what it's sort of about, and that lesson I learned from the Miller stuff early was you can go either way with it, and that Batman I loved, I think, because it was so of that moment for me. And over the years, there was always a Batman that spoke to Bruce, that spoke to some aspect of my personality. Like, I loved the animated stuff so deeply when I was in college, because I felt like Bruce became more of a sort of a cipher, and that series was more about finding characters that lived in Gotham and exploring their experiences in different ways. And then for me with Grant, it was so different. So my Bruce, I think the thing that I always come back to with Bruce Wayne is just his mortality, the fact that he's so human as much as he's this incredible kind of, pinnacle of human achievement. When you look at him in Dark Knight, or even in Grant stuff, which, figures him so larger than life, there's still this mortality. There's the sense that he's human, standing next to all these gods and all of these obstacles that seem impossible to overcome, and his villains are larger than life. And yet, Alfred and all these other things ground him. He's just a guy, and I love that aspect of him, that pathos, where he sacrifices his body and all of this stuff every night for the city in this kind of strange way, and yet at the same time, he becomes this thing that's abstract, this legend, this ghost, this samurai's kind of phantom. But deep down, he's still just a flesh and blood person who is aging and is deeply vulnerable, and that nexus is just endlessly interesting to me because it's about us. I love the idea that Bruce is essentially, to me, I think, and you tell me what you think, but I've been looking at our run a lot because obviously as we near 50 and we're talking about what we're going to do next, and I'm not sure how long we'll be on the book or how long both of us will be on the book, if I'll leave or Greg will leave, or we're not sure. We're really not sure yet. But I will tell you this, like, we're going to be a team for a long time, and whatever we do, we have a lot of stuff we want to do together. And I have ideas I'd really like to do on Batman also, in different ways, whether in the main series or separately after 50 as well. But I've been looking back, and one of the things that I really love about Bruce, our version, or I think that I connect to, is that as a kid, I think I needed him to be the symbol. It was, you want him to scare everybody back into the shadows, and that's what he was. He was this kind of demon that, like, in a pre-9/11 world, it was like, I'm going to take the city back for you, and I'm going to show you everyone better be afraid of me, and I'm going to beat up this guy, and put this guy in jail, and get everybody. And it was that kind of Death Wish, Dirty Harry feel a little bit to Batman, and not in a bad way, but in a way that was sort of like empowering, with kind of fantasy about him. And since then, I feel like we've tried hard, not even deliberately, but it just is the way I feel for my kids, that they don't really need a symbol of somebody that says, I can do this, and I'm gonna take the city back from the bad guys. It's more or less a symbol it's less a mission of scaring bad guys back into the shadows than it is inspiring good people to be brave in a city where obstacles seem, whether they're social issues that are entrenched and intractable and really difficult to overcome, or the big issues that we worry about today that I feel my kids think about. They don't think about gangs they think about gangs in terms of kind of the national conversation, but in New York, they don't worry about the same things I worried about as a kid. They worry about terrorism, and they worry about superstorms, they worry about resources being gone in apocalyptic situations where suddenly it's a blackout. And these are their fears. My son, for example, they have school shooter drills, you know, which is the worst thing in the world. And one day he got locked in the hallway because they didn't realize he was getting water. And he won't go to school without a water bottle anymore, you know, because he doesn't want to, he's 8, and he doesn't want to get locked in the hallway because he's afraid of this idea of shooters. And so when I did 0 Year, the Red Hood Gang is that. It's translated into comic book language, but it's meant to be this random violence, and they celebrate that in the book. And you try and find ways of making Bruce about the things that you want him to tell your kids and yourself to be brave about. So sometimes it's your anxieties, like death of the family is my anxieties about being a parent. Whereas, and Endgame is my anxieties, you know, as well. But 0 Year was about, these are the things I want my kids to look at him and be brave about. And that's what I think has changed a lot, what I relate to so deeply about Bruce, is that once I realized we're trying to make him a symbol of inspiration and bravery to a population facing very terrifying large problems that go beyond the city in a lot of ways, instead of a figure that scares bad guys back, it just took on a whole life for me. And that was around 0 Year. I remember talking to you about that and really getting that. So he speaks to me in that way. I think he's endlessly interesting because he inspires us all to sort of overcome whatever seems impossible to defeat.
Well, I've got more questions, but I want to open it up to the crowd. And who's got a question for Scott?
You ask me anything.
Come on. Yeah.
Sure.
How'd the conversation go super heavy about shaving off Gordon's mustache?
Yes, how'd the conversation go about shaving off Gordon's mustache? Super heavy. Well, spoiler, the mustache is actually the big villain at the end of the story. Wouldn't that be great if it was this radioactive mustache?
That's the real identity of Mr. Bloom.
Exactly, Mr. Bloom is like, what's up? It's just the mustache. You forgot me. It went really interestingly because at first they loved the idea, and then when they saw the art, there was a little blowback where they were like, is Gordon not going to be recognizable to people? And I was like, they were like, is there a way to give him a face mask as Batman so he can keep his mustache? And I was like, no, or he could just have a mustache. And Greg drew him once with a mustache and a cowl, and it was kind of awesome. It was sort of like 70s Burt Reynolds. And I was like, I can deal with that. And then it was like, nobody's going to take that seriously. There's no way. And so Greg and I had a lot of fun with it, actually. I think he kind of taunted them a little bit. What if he's like this? And they were like, no, you know, like all the variations of how bad the mustache would look until they kind of caved. So I love it. I'll tell you a spoiler, like I love writing Gordon so much. And when I got on Batman, it was like I was writing Dick Grayson, and Dick Grayson was like young and terrified of being Batman and excited, and I was terrified of writing Batman, and so I was like, this is perfect for me. And then now I'm kind of like been on the book 4 years, and Gordon is kind of old, you know, and I'm like, this is perfect for me. Like, do I have it in me again? And the story is so young. It's such a challenging story in a way that I feel like a young writer on it, because it's juggling so many different things between Duke Thomas's story and Bruce's story, and doing all these different things. There's no place to hide in the story, which I love. And ultimately, I wanted to do this book afterwards where I was like, what if I keep Gordon this way and I do this book that's like Bullet, you know? I love that movie, like Steve McQueen, you know? And what if he just like goes rogue, and it's like he's got an awesome muscle car, it's like Gordon, you know, Jim, it's like that 60s kind of cool, badass thing. And DC was like, yeah, we'll get back to you on that. What? So it's in my mind, it's in my fan fiction. It exists.
Yes.
Besides Frank Miller's version of Batman, was there any other versions that really influenced you in you shaping Batman?
Yeah, he asked me if there are other versions of Batman that really shape me. I mean, the biggest things in the DNA of our Batman are Frank Miller's Batman, the animated series, I would say, is just tremendous for me, and I think you can see the fingerprint of that in my stuff. And honestly, Grant was a huge influence, both as a mentor. I don't know him that well, but the times that we've hung out, he's been very inspirational, and his run is inspirational and epic. And the thing that I love about his work, even though we're very different writers, and I marvel at like the kind of cerebral machinery he has in terms of this imagination engine, and we're very different in certain ways. That way is that he is so fearless, and all the guys that I love, that's what it is. The women and men in comics, that when you see someone doing a fearless interpretation of something, and it's true to core, but it's theirs. Like when you read Brubaker's Captain America, you know what I mean? Or you're reading, or Willow on Miss Marvel, or you read, you know, these books, you're like, that's not what I expected and that's different. But that sees it from a whole new angle where you're like, and so for me, those are sort of my big influences on Batman. Denny O'Neil is a big influence as well, but, you know, all that stuff that I love.